Hello, my name's Lad Dunfield. I'm the pastor of the St. Andrew's Baptist Church here in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, and I'd like to welcome you to our program. Anxiety. Growing up, I had a lot of anxiety as a kid. I didn't know what it was then. I didn't understand it. I just knew that at certain times and certain circumstances, that something began to take place in my body physically that caused me to begin to become nervous. My throat would dry. And eventually it got to a place where I would start to want to avoid certain situations. I remember one class that I had in school in particular. I wasn't good in the class. I didn't understand a lot of what was being taught in the class. But there I was. I was in it. I had no way out of it. And I sat in dread every single class that the teacher was going to ask me a question, that the teacher was going to ask me to do something, that she was going to ask me to go up to the board, the chalkboard back in those days, and write the problem out or to do something along that line. And the harder I tried to understand it, the more confused I became and the more frightened I was. And it got to a place that it wasn't just third period in the morning when we went to that class that I began to become anxious. I became anxious before I even went to school. I would wake up in the morning and I would be going, whoa, I don't want to go to school. And I would start to do anything I could to try to not go. I would say I was sick. And of course things became self-perpetuating. The more anxious I was and the more upset I was, the less I was able to understand what was going on in the class, the worse grade I got, and the more the teacher, I thought at the time, was picking on me, but more the teacher would have to spend trying to teach me something. I don't know about you, but everybody has some form of anxiety in some case, a large portion of our society. And anxieties become even more difficult now because we now live in a world of COVID. And anxiety is a commodity that is pushed from morning to evening. People are constantly talking about the results of COVID, the death count, how many people are sick. We're talking about lockdowns. We're talking about young children having committed suicide because of these lockdowns, people losing their friends, people unable to get together, sometimes having to just be by themselves with just one friend in a small bubble at one time. And anxiety gets to be to a place where people become more and more frightened. I remember going to visit someone the other day on a pastoral visit. I went to the door and they yelled, "Oh, don't come in, I'm not ready, I'm not ready." And I thought, oh, somebody's changing or they're doing something. But sure enough, the person hadn't put their mask on yet. And anxiety is something that is becoming actually a way of life in our society. And that's never good. King David knew a lot about anxiety. He knew what it was like to have his son plot to kill him. He knew what it was like to have King Saul hunt him and try to take his life and having to flee from the king for long periods of time. And he also knew what it was like to have guilt, to have taken the life or have caused the death of one of his best friends in order to take the man's wife. These were anxious times for David. And yet David could write the most beautiful psalms of assurance. In Psalm 139, he writes, "How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. When I do count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand." He's saying, God, your blessings are amazing. He goes on and he says in verse 23 of the 139th Psalm, he says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is anything offensive in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." It's an amazing concept. David says, search my heart, look into my anxious thoughts and help me out. Help me get through these things. Help me to deal with them. Well, we're going to look at a future psalm, another psalm in our church service. And if you're interested in seeing this complete aspect of what I'm kind of just alluding to, on Sunday evening at 6:30 on St. Andrew's Baptist Church website, I'll be giving this whole talk in its completeness, which I can only kind of skim the surface of here. So I'd like to invite you to do that if you're free. So how do we deal with anxiety? How do we begin to look at it? Well, I wrote down 7 just basic things. These are not necessarily great biblical truths, but they're also not things that are just found in self-help books. I got looking the other day at some sermons for another project I was working on, and I discovered in there that in 2020, 2021, the most sought after sermons were sermons that help people deal with anxiety and stress. And I just thought, wow, it's an amazing concept that there is so much stress that people by the tens of thousands are looking and searching and watching sermons that deal with stress and anxiety. So this most certainly, what I'm talking about, is not the all and end all. It's just some thoughts that I wrote down that have helped me deal with anxiety. And I'm one who has had a lot of anxiety in their life. The first thing is I believe that we're taking too much junk into our lives. It's as simple as that. We are feeding so much information into our minds, into our hearts, that it just becomes a confused jumble. And as a result of that, we can't tell what is fiction from what is false, from what is true. And as a result, we begin more and more and more to begin to try and guess at what we should be doing and how we should act and how we should relate to different circumstances. For instance, news cycles cram a lot of things into a small period of time. And if you spend the majority of your time watching the news, and some people have it on 24/7, they start in the morning, they wake up, they go to their phone, they start putting in the news, they watch the news while they eat. At work, they'll have updates come on their computer. The evening, they'll watch the late news, the evening news. And anxiety and stress sells. It sells products. Commercials play upon it. Corporations play upon it. The media plays upon it. And you're the one who suffers for it. Because by the end of the night, having watched hours and hours and listened to hours of things being pumped into your system, that oftentimes are very frightening and are very scary, it becomes very, very easy to become anxious and fearful. They say that the average young person today is spending 4 to 5 hours a day on their phone. But it's not just young people. There's a lot of adults now who are on their phone all the time. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on things all the time, and they're getting a constant bombardment from individuals. I have a friend that if I go on Messenger, as soon as she sees me on there, she starts sending me articles about COVID. And after a while, if you read all this stuff and you let this stuff sink into you, you're going to become stressed. So the first thing I would say is that if you want to get your anxiety levels down, stop taking so much junk into your life. Try going a day. Try going 2 days and then going a week with just listening to a small amount of news. And then digest it in your own mind. Don't let newscasters tell you what to think. Do some thinking on your own about this. Anxiety is when you begin to believe that you have no way out of a situation that is beyond your control. You are being controlled by the circumstances of what's going on, and you don't have the ability to be able to speak up to it and deal with it, and so the body begins to process that and become more anxious. The second thing is get some balance into your life. And we all know that. We need to set priorities. We need to emphasize the things that are important in our life, and we need to work on those things, and the things that are unimportant in our life, or not nearly as important in our life, we need to just not put the worry and the stress into them. One of the sermons that I was looking at by a pastor, he said that he had gone through a very stressful time in his church, and he wasn't sure how to move forward. So he went and he saw a mentor, one of his mentors that had helped him on his rise up in the church. And he sat down and he had his notebook and he went through and he says, hey, I'm going through this problem and I'm dealing with that situation and I'm dealing with this one and I'm dealing with that one and I am stressed to the hilt. I don't know which way to turn. There are so many situations and they're all coming at once. How do I sit down and deal with these things? How do I put them and deal with them? How do I get them in any form of priority? And he got his paper out and he went to write down. And he asked the mentor, he says, what's your piece of advice? And the old wise pastor looked at him and he said, so what? So what? And that's true, isn't it? Of so many things in our lives, we think that they're overwhelming. We think there's no way around them. We think that somehow if we contemplate them and we think about them and we never stop worrying about them, that somehow they're going to get better, or they're going to go away, or they're going to change. No, they're not. Things change when we change on how we approach them. This anxiety isn't the problem in your life and my life. It's how we process situations in our lives that make the difference. And whether or not we become anxious or we go, so what? It'll work out. Let's see it through. Let's do our best to deal with the situation. Let's do what we can. Let's try our best. But worrying, being anxious, having complete anxiety breakdowns, anxious episodes, what do they actually accomplish in the long run? Now, I know a lot of people go, yeah, but these are conditions, it doesn't go away that easy, and I understand that. I'm not saying all anxiety goes away, and I'm not saying that these things won't happen. I'm saying they can become a less of a factor in your life if you decide to do some things in your life Like take less junk into your life that stresses you. If you know there are things that trigger you, and you turn on the TV, and you go to watch a newscast, and all of a sudden there's something political on, and it just triggers you, move on. You don't need to sit there and want to throw your boot through the TV set all night. You don't need to sit there and scream and holler and get yourself and your blood pressure all up. Walk away from it. So what? Let them say what they're going to say. It doesn't have to impact you the same way. And find balance. When I was a young pastor, I wanted to do really well. And I spent hours out. I would visit with people. I would spend time being here and there. I spent every night a week, except one night, I was out till 10, 11 o'clock at night. I was just busy with other people's lives to such an extent that I wasn't as busy as I should have been with the things that really count, with my own family and my own way of relaxation. Instead, I was so busy that I had no balance. And you and I need balance in our life. Unfortunately, those are the only two things I can talk about because we're out of time. But like I said, tune in Sunday evening, 6:30 on St. Andrew's Baptist Church Facebook page, and I'll go through the last 5, and next week I'll try to carry through and do the last 4 or 5 of these stress factors. But you and I don't have to live under stress. Doesn't mean it's going to go away completely, but we can bring those factors down to a place where we can breathe easy again and not feel like the shoe's going to fall all the time, that no matter how happy we are, no matter what we're doing, that something is going to happen to us. We don't have to live that way. And God doesn't want you to live that way. God wants you to be happy and full of joy. He wants you to have a peace that passes all understanding. He wants to hold you in his hand and tell you how much he loves you, how important you are, how much you are cared for. And don't let anxiety get in the way of that. My name's Lad Dunfield. I'm the pastor of the St. Andrew's Baptist Church here in St. Andrews, New Brunswick. I want to thank you for watching. If you need to get in touch with me, it's ladd, L-A-D-D, at thebeggardanced, all one word, .com. I'd be glad to respond to anything you write to me. So thanks for watching. See you next week. Stay safe. Have a wonderful week.